Let me conclude by just giving you one larger tale in this marvelous book, and that's the tale of Prohibition that I think ties together much of many of the strands that I've been suggesting. Prohibition, if you haven't read it and you haven't read the book, you'll be surprised to hear, is arguably the most sustained reform movement in American history. Not the one you would have picked. Nevertheless, there it is. If you take simply the number of people involved as percentage of the population, it's not even a contest. There were a series of waves. By the 1850s, 3 different states had outlawed alcohol. And then, after endless effort, a century of trying, Americans stop the drinking of alcohol. No, that's put wrong. Try to stop the drinking of alcohol from coast to coast. First, why does it happen? There's a series of explanations. One, foreigners again. The big cities, particularly on the East Coast, but Los Angeles fit too. The big cities were full of foreigners who hung out in saloons and had to be controlled. They were ruining America. The people in the heartlands who always voted for Prohibition were particularly worried about this threat of others. Race. The final wave of Prohibition, for Prohibition, starts in the South at exactly the time Jim Crow goes into place, between 1905 and 1915. And the idea of trying to control African Americans, needing to control African Americans, led to the idea that we had to control drink throughout the South. So Prohibition becomes very important, all wrapped up with trying to keep African Americans in their place after 50 years of struggle following the Civil War. It was crucial for Prohibition that the Democrats retook Congress, by the way, in the Wilson administration. Third, and very differently, it was a women's issue. It was a moral issue that was part of the effort to stop violence against women in the 19th and early 20th century. Wherever women's suffrage won, as it won in all the Western states, Prohibition, in every case but one, followed on the state level the following year. The state but one was New York. World War I, as Peter writes in his book. So we've got foreigners, race, the moral uplift of gender, and finally World War I. World War I made the whole effort of Prohibition a patriotic effort. At the commencement at Brown University, President Faunce looks out at the young men who are going off to fight and says, "You will be the great Christian army, the most Christian army the world has ever known." And then he turns to the rest of the audience and says, "And can we do anything less?" And then makes his appeal for Prohibition. So a very mixed story in this chapter Peter tells, controlling them, moral aspiration, and patriotism. But the consequence is interesting, the rise of big government. The rise of big government is usually attributed to the New Deal, all those things Roosevelt tried. He never tried anything as ambitious as telling people from coast to coast, "Thou shalt not drink." And today, all the institutions built up to run down liquor are now cheerfully applied by the Supreme Court in the effort to run down drugs. Incidentally, speaking of marijuana, the narrative of Prohibition, and here I differ with Peter just a little bit, the narrative of Prohibition is what? A failure. The newspapers like to have their reporters go into a strange city and see how long it would take for them to find an illegal drink. And in the big cities, if it took you more than 10 minutes, you weren't really trying. But there's another narrative about Prohibition, and that is that it succeeded. It succeeded in the conservative areas of the country, in the South and in the Midwestern heartland, in all the places that wanted to say, we're not like those people in the cities, we're not foreigners, we're Americans, and we believe in Prohibition. To this day, half the counties in the United States are still dry. You just won't find those dry counties in places like Rhode Island.